Today we will be learning about the English units of measurement. To begin with, the English units of measurement are the measurements or the units that are used in the United States. Also, the units we will be looking at are those of length and volume. We will also be looking at the units of time, but the units of time are universal, meaning that all countries use the same units of time. Let's start out with the measurements of length, and we're going to start with the largest to the smallest. The largest unit of length we'll be discussing is yards. Yards are sometimes abbreviated YD. Then we have feet, which is abbreviated FT. And finally we have inches that are abbreviated IN. Below you can see 3 equal boxes. These 3 equal boxes all represent 1 yard. The first box is a yard that has not been divided up into any smaller pieces. In the second one, we can see that the yard has been divided up into equal thirds. Each third is equivalent or equal to 1 foot. Therefore, a yard is equivalent to 3 feet since there are 3 feet in 1 yard. Let's write that out. We could also say that 3 feet equals 1 yard, since an equal sign can have its parts on either side, meaning that both sides of the equal sign are equal. Now, if we further divided the foot into smaller gradations, we could divide them into something called an inch. Each one of the smaller boxes is 1 inch. If we count up how many smaller boxes there are, we would see that there are 12 inches. And these 12 inches are in each foot. This means that 1 foot equals 12 inches. Or 12 inches equals 1 foot. We also could add one more of these conversions. What we could add is that 1 yard would be equivalent to 36 inches, because if we added the first 12, the second 12, and the third 12 together, we would get 36 inches. And remember, the box was representing 1 yard. So also, 1 yard could equal 36 inches. One more conversion could be that the yard is split up into 3 feet, which we had written as 1 yard equals 3 feet. But we could also say that 1 foot would be equal to 1/3 of a yard. Now, conversion factors. So, a conversion factor is a fraction where the numerator and the denominator are equal. We use conversion factors to be able to convert between different units. what we mean by this is if I was trying to figure out how many feet were in a yard, I could use the conversion factor of 3 feet per yard. Now, let's learn about the measurements of volume. In the measurements of volume, we are going to draw the gallon man to help us remember these measurements. The measurements of volume start out with the largest, which is 1 gallon. A gallon is sometimes abbreviated GAL. Next, we have quarts, or QUARTS. These are abbreviated QT. Then we have pints, and pints are abbreviated PT. Smaller than a pint is a cup, and cups are abbreviated with a capital C. Then we have ounces, and ounces are abbreviated OZ. Now, let's draw our gallon man to help us to determine how many parts are in each of these. To begin with, we're going to draw gallon man's body. Gallon man's body is 1 gallon. If I further divided gallon man's body into quarters, 1 for each of his arms or legs, each one of those quarters would be 1 quart. So let's draw on 1 quart for each of his arms and legs. Now, if I further divided this 1 quart in half, I then could get 2 pints. Which means that there are 2 pints in each quart. Since there are 2 pints in each quart, and there were 4 quarts in 1 gallon, this would mean that there were actually 2, 4, 6, 8 pints in 1 gallon. Then if we further divide a pint, each pint is divided into 2 cups. Which means that all of the pints are divided into cups would give us all of the cups for the gallon man. So let's write a summary of what we just did. For 1 gallon, we saw that was equivalent to 4 quarts. Then we saw that for each quart, it was equivalent to 2 pints. Then for each pint, that was equivalent to 2 cups. And finally, for each cup, it is equivalent to 8 fluid ounces. Let's look at a completed gallon man that has a little bit more accurate colored representation. As you can see on Gallon Man here, there are 4 quarts in 1 gallon, 8 pints in 1 gallon, and 16 cups in 1 gallon. There are numerous conversion factors that we could write for Gallon Man. We are simply going to keep with having the 1 gallon equals 4 quarts, 1 quart equals 2 pints, 1 pint equals 2 cups, and 1 cup equals 8 ounces. Some people find it easier to compare all of them to gallons and say that 4 quarts equals 1 gallon, 8 pints equals 1 gallon, and 16 cups equals 1 gallon. Now that we learned about the measurements of both length and volume, let's look at the universal measurement of time. The measurements of time from longest to shortest are years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, and seconds. Let's start with the seconds, minutes, and hours on the clock. To begin with, the clock even has hands to help us with each of these. The red hand is called the seconds hand. The longer of the two hands is called the minutes hand. And the shorter of the two is for hours. If we begin with the seconds hand, as you can see, there are small numbers around the outside edge. These small numbers are for both the seconds and the minutes. As you can see, if it went around the clock one complete time, that would mean that there were 60 seconds. So we need to know, what is this 60 seconds in? If we also use these numbers for minutes, that would mean that the minute hand would have moved one place. So it would have been 1 minute. This means that there are 60 seconds in 1 minute. Also, if we're using these small digits as our minutes, that would mean that there were 60 minutes in 1 hour. Now, the very large numbers on the clock are the ones that we're using for hours. As you can see, there are 12. This does not mean that there are 12 hours in one day, because it actually goes around 2 times. So 12 times 2 actually gives us 24 hours in one day. We usually call the first 12 hours AM and the second 12 hours PM, but when we add them together, we get the 24 hours that make up the entire day. Now we have a calendar. The calendar is showing a number for each day. Let's start by looking at the calendar and finding out how many months are in 1 year. As you can see, there are 12 months, each with a name starting from January to December. So we could say that 1 year equals 12 months. Now if we look at each month and we try to determine the number of weeks in each month, we would see that some months have a little more than 4 weeks, some months have exactly 4 weeks, and other months have more than 4 weeks as well. This means we cannot directly make a relation between months and weeks, because each month has a different number of weeks. Let's then find out how many weeks are in the entire year. So for 1 year, we are going to find out how many weeks. So to do this, let's start by finding how many whole weeks we have. So in this 1 month, we have 4 whole weeks. Then if we look at the next month, we also have 4 whole weeks. In the next month, we have 4 more whole weeks, but we aren't going to highlight the partial week. We're going to first find all of the whole weeks. So if we continue this pattern and we highlight all of the whole weeks, we will then be able to determine the first part of this number. Writing down all of the whole weeks, we can now go back and find the partial weeks. Starting in March, its partial week carries over to April. So let's add 1 more in between March and April. The next partial week connects April to March, so let's add an additional 1 week. Let's continue to do this for the rest of the calendar. If we get to the end, we can see that December actually then rolls over into January. As you can see, it doesn't start on exactly the same day because each year starts on a different day of the week. So, January of 2016 would be starting on Friday the 1st, and then it would be Saturday the 2nd. So, this additional week would then be added at the end. This means that if we add all of these up, we would have 52 weeks in 1 year. The last thing that we could do is find out how many days are in 1 year. If we counted up all of the days, we have 365 days. The exception to this rule is when we have a leap year in which we have 366 days. To begin with, in example 1, we would like to figure out how many feet and how many yards 48 inches would be equivalent to. Let's start by figuring out how many feet 48 inches becomes. To do this, I must first think back to my equivalence. The equivalence that I learned was that 12 inches equals 1 foot. And remember we said that we could write this as a fraction or a conversion factor. That means that I could either write 12 inches over 1 foot, or I could write it as 1 foot over 12 inches. To determine which way I should write it, I look back at the problem I've started with, and I see that I have 48 inches. I would like to reduce the inches out, and just like when reducing fractions, you find a common factor, we would need a common unit to be able to reduce the units out. This means that I would need a common unit in the denominator. That means I would need to use the 1 feet over 12 inches. When I write 1 feet over 12 inches, I then can see that the inches would reduce. This would then give me 48 over 12 feet. But 48 over 12 is not a reduced fraction. I would need to reduce further. You can use either division by dividing out common factors or use prime factorization. Once you have completed this, you will see that it equals 4 feet. Now, let's determine the number of yards. If I have 48 inches and I want to move this into yards, I have to remember that for 1 yard, it equals 36 inches. Once I remember that 1 yard equals 36 inches, I then can write this as a fraction of either 1 yard over 36 inches or 36 inches over 1 yard. I would like the inches to reduce out, therefore I pick the first one that has inches in the denominator. So if I multiply by this conversion factor of 1 yard over 36 inches, which means I get 48 over 36 yards. I now need to reduce or divide, and when doing so, I will get 1.33 or 1 1/3 yards. You may also have reduced and found that you had 4 over 3. Remember, when you have an improper fraction such as 4/3, you must then find its mixed number counterpart, or 1 1/3. Now, try practice problem 1 on your own, remembering to pause the video. Now I will show you how to work out practice problem number 1. To determine the number of yards and inches in 15 feet. To begin with, let's start by writing 15 feet. We know we need to multiply it by a conversion factor, so we must first remember the conversion factor that will get us from yards to feet. Remembering that 1 yard equals 3 feet will be the first part. Now we have to determine what goes in the denominator. Is it the 1 yard or the 3 feet? Since I would like to reduce the feet out, I will put 3 feet in the denominator, which means that I must put 1 yard in the numerator. The feet reduce out, which leaves me with 15 over 3 yards. I now must reduce this, and 15 divided by 3 gives me 5 yards. Now, let's convert this 15 feet into inches as well, remembering that 1 foot equals 12 inches. This time, I must put the 1 foot on the bottom and put the 12 inches in the numerator because I would like the feet to reduce out. When the feet reduce out, I'm left with 15 times 12. 15 times 12 is 180 inches. Now, let's look at a couple of examples for volume. Example 2 asks us to determine the number of quarts and cups in 10 pints. Let's start by writing down 10 pints. Then we must remember the conversion between pints and quarts. If you remember that 1 quart or 1 arm on Gallon Man had 2 pieces below it, or 1 quart equals 2 pints, we then have something we can set up as a conversion factor. Remember, we always want to put in the denominator whatever we are trying to get rid of, which means that we put 2 pints in the denominator so that the pints will reduce out, and we will put 1 quart in the numerator. This will give us 10 over 2 quarts, which we must reduce to give us 5 quarts. As you can see, this was done exactly the same as we did in the conversion between units of length. Doing conversions is exactly the same no matter what you're converting between. The only difference is that you must know a conversion factor or the equivalent to units. Let's now do 10 pints and determine the number of cups. Once again, we have to remember back to Gallon Man and know that 1 pint equals 2 cups. This can then be written in a fraction as well, or a conversion factor, remembering to put the 1 pint in the denominator so that pints will reduce out, and the 2 cups in the numerator. We now have 10 times 2, which gives us 20 cups. Now try practice problem 2 on your own, remembering to pause the video. Now, let's do practice problem 2. We need to determine the number of gallons and pints in 12 quarts. Let's start by writing 12 quarts. Now that we've written 12 quarts, we need to know the conversion factor between quarts and gallons. Remembering that 1 gallon equals 4 quarts, we can now set up our conversion factor. We would like to get rid of quarts, therefore we put the 4 quarts on the bottom. And we'll put 1 gallon in the numerator. The quarts are then reduced out, and we have 12 over 4 gallons. 12 divided by 4 is 3 gallons. Remember, you must always reduce your answers. Now, let's determine the number of pints in 12 quarts. Once again, we start by writing 12 quarts, and then remembering that 1 quart is equivalent to 2 pints. One quart would go in the denominator, and 2 pints would go in the numerator. The quarts would reduce out, giving us 24 pints. As you can see in this practice problem, we use the same conversion. 1 quart equals 2 pints, but in the example, we had pints in the denominator, and in the practice problem, we had pints in the numerator. Remember, you can use the same conversion factor for 2 different problems, but you must ensure that the unit you place in the denominator will reduce with the unit you currently have. Let's look at a third practice that practices conversions of time. The first asks us to determine the number of weeks and hours in 14 days. Let's start by writing 14 days. We now need to know how many days are in a week. There are 7 days in 1 week. Now that we know that there are 7 days in 1 week, we can then place that in the denominator. Because remember, we would like to get rid of days so that we can get to the units of weeks. This means that we have 14 over 7 weeks. 14 divided by 7 is 2 weeks. Now let's convert the 14 days into hours. We must remember that 1 day equals 24 hours. So we will start by putting 1 day in the denominator and 24 hours in the numerator. We would like the days to reduce out. We now have to do 14 times 24. 14 times 24 is 326 hours. So there are 326 hours in 14 days, which is equivalent to 2 weeks. Now, let's determine the number of seconds and hours in 720 minutes. Remember to pause the video while you practice this. Now I will show you how to do this problem. Let's start out by writing 720 minutes. We now need to know how many seconds are in each minute. And we know that 1 minute equals 60 seconds. We can use this conversion factor to set up our problem, which means that we'd need 1 minute in the denominator so that minutes will reduce out, and 60 seconds in the numerator. 720 times 60 will give us 43,200 seconds. Now let's convert 720 minutes into hours. We must remember that there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. This means we need to put the minutes in the denominator once again, seeing as we would like the minutes to reduce out. The minutes reduce out, and we have 720 over 60 hours. 720 divided by 60 gives us 12 hours. Remember, each of these seems slightly different, but they all use a conversion factor or a fraction that has an equivalent numerator and denominator to change the units. The conversion factors in this video are very common conversion factors. Therefore, it would be a good idea to memorize them.